we have the pleasure of having two guests. I got a surprise yesterday, which is we have two guests. We have here our, what I like to call our first public defender, Heather Rogers, who will be presenting on the issues impacting public defense, I would say the intersection between homelessness and the effect on public defense. I apologize, I got some notes here, but I'm a little smart. Heather has worked as a public defender for almost 2 decades. She worked as a public defender in Monterey County, at the Federal Public Defender for Northern District of California, and for the contracted defense firm that previously provided public defense services for Santa Cruz County. Throughout her career, she has represented clients accused of offenses from delinquency to homicide, defended detainees incarcerated at Guantánamo Naval Base, I didn't know, and has argued cases in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. She's a graduate from the University of Chicago and Stanford, has taught at California Western School of Law and Monterey College of Law, is a faculty member of the National Criminal Defense College, and is a lecturer in legal studies at UCSC locally, and frequently provides training at regional and national skills training programs. She's also a board member of the Housing for Health Partnership Policy Board, Community Corrections Partnership, Criminal Justice Council, Juvenile Justice Coordinating Council, Santa Cruz County Trial Lawyers Association, and Santa Cruz County Defense Bar. That's a ton. Last but not least, she is a Santa Cruz local, born and raised, and so is intimately aware of the issues that our area is experiencing and has experienced, and how those have changed over time. Additionally, let's see, there we are. I'm Caitlin on the screen here. We have the pleasure of being joined by Caitlin Becker, who is the director of the Hollistic Defense Division, where she develops, coordinates, and oversees holistic defense for the Public Defender's Office, including working with social workers, client advocates, attorneys, investigators, administrative professionals, and outside experts to provide clients with interdisciplinary services designed to meet clients' legal and personal goals. Caitlin has a master's degree in social work from Fordham University and has been a holistic defense social worker for more than a decade, representing people charged in the criminal, family, immigration, and civil systems in New York and California. And prior to joining the Santa Cruz County Office of the Public Defender, Caitlin was the managing director of social work at the Bronx Defenders, where she directed a team of more than 50 social workers and advocates. She also has an extensive list of experience in terms of working with alternative programs to incarceration, such as the Abram House, and working with young adults and teens, such as in the Covenant House, and working to coordinate volunteers, such as through the Dorothy Day Center for Service and Justice. So, all that said, I will leave it to our guests to inform us.
Thank you so much, Ray, for that amazing introduction. And we are so super happy to be here with all of you who care so much about so many of the same issues that we do. I thought it was important to bring Caitlin because we're talking about homelessness and folks who are unhoused or facing housing instability. And that's exactly what her division does, as we'll tell you more about tonight. I'm not sure how much time you wanted me to present for. If it feels too long, just cut me off and we can go straight to the discussion. But again, super happy to be here. Please chime in if you have questions or comments along the way. We really are here for you and to start a conversation that we hope is an ongoing one on this important issue. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see that? Fantastic. Okay. So homelessness and entanglement in the criminal legal system really go hand in hand. Having been a defender for 20 years in all the systems, this is just something that I've seen for that entire time across every jurisdiction I've ever worked. A story that comes to mind from our work here in Santa Cruz County is a female client with mental health issues who was sexually assaulted on the streets. She took shelter in an unoccupied home that was under construction, and she was charged with felony first-degree residential burglary, which requires entry into a dwelling for the purpose of committing a felony. The prosecution's theory was she entered this partially built, unoccupied house to steal utilities, and the proof was she took a shower. First-degree residential burglary is a serious felony. It's a strike that carries up to 6 years in prison. The elements of the crime likely were met in this case. She entered the house, she stole the shower, but is saddling this woman with a strike felony the right call? From the standpoint of ethics, from the standpoint of policy, from the standpoint of law? This is just one of the hundreds of ways homelessness is criminalized in our county. This issue tugs on the frayed fibers of our broken safety net. It pits neighbors against each other, and it's pushed our criminal legal system to the breaking point. I appreciate your asking me to come and talk about this issue, but with all humility, I really come not as an expert, but as a concerned community leader, in the spirit of all of you who are dedicated to centering compassion, equity, and sound policy in the decisions that we make every day as public servants and informed voters. Tonight, I'll talk about what we know about the scope of homelessness and housing insecurity in Santa Cruz County, some of the ways the legal system has been used to tackle this problem, some of the laws that impact our unhoused population, and what we're doing as an office to approach this issue in the spirit of courage, compassion, and community. Along the way, I hope you'll chime in. I welcome your questions, your thoughts, discussion, and your experiences with this issue. Homelessness in Santa Cruz County, as I know all of you know all too well, is a persistent problem. Every 2 years, communities across the country conduct what's called a point-in-time count. It's essentially a head count of the local homeless population. Our last count happened on February 28th, 2022, and we found 2,299 individuals facing homelessness, which is a little less than 1% of the population of Santa Cruz County. Santa Cruz County as a whole has one of the highest per capita rates of homelessness in the state, with a percentage twice as high as California's overall percentage of unhoused. Experts suggest the count drastically underestimates the true scope of the problem. Homelessness in Santa Cruz County is a crisis, and it's a crisis that affects the well-being of all of our community members, both housed and unhoused. The count showed that homelessness affects people across a broad spectrum of characteristics and experiences, though traditionally marginalized populations bear the brunt of this as they do so many other things. The homeless population includes people of all ages, with 14% young, under the age of 25. Homelessness affects all genders and sexual orientations, though men are disproportionately impacted at 66%. People of color are heavily overrepresented at 39% Latinx Hispanic, 9% multiple races, 12% Black, and 3% Native American. This concerns me. People who were in foster care are overrepresented in the unhoused population at 39%. 39% of our unhoused were previously in foster care. Something we need to think about. Many people in our unhoused community are sick. 77% of the respondents reported at least one disabling condition. 67% struggle with drug or alcohol use. 57% have a physical disability. 49% have chronic health conditions. 39% have psychiatric or emotional conditions. 35% have PTSD. 12% have an HIV/AIDS related illness, and 10% have traumatic brain injury. There are a lot of myths surrounding unhoused people, and othering that makes it easier to subscribe to divisive narratives and to engage in discrimination against the unhoused. One of those myths is that most homeless people choose to be homeless. Let me tell you right now, that is not true. A study out of Denver showed that when homeless people were offered supportive housing, 90% accepted that housing. And our count found that in Santa Cruz County, people most often become homeless after being evicted from housing or losing a job. There but for the grace of God go I, right? This could happen to people we love and care about too. Another myth is that homeless people don't want to work. That's not true either. In fact, 20% of unhoused people in Santa Cruz County have some form of employment. And out of those who are unemployed, only 10% of those able to work were not actively looking for work. And remember what I talked about in terms of sickness, right? These are folks who are looking for work and trying to work while saddled with physical and mental disabilities. There's also a persistent myth that this is just impossible to solve. Solving the homelessness crisis is too expensive. Why even try? That's also not true. Studies show that the cost of not effectively addressing this crisis is far greater than the cost of providing housing, far greater. A study out of the University of North Carolina at Charlotte tracked chronically homeless adults, finding that housing people led to dramatic cost savings that more than paid for the cost of putting people in decent housing. They had $1.8 million in healthcare savings from 447 fewer ER visits, 372 fewer hospital days, which was a nearly 80% reduction, and once housed, people previously homeless spent 84 fewer days in jail, with a 72% drop in arrests. Life-changing for the people who are unhoused, and life-changing for our community, which is spending too much money on not housing people.
Right.
Which brings us to an issue that is close to my heart as the county public defender. One thing that is true is that unhoused people are disproportionately impacted by the criminal legal system. 30% of the point-in-time count respondents said they'd spent time in jail, prison, or the juvenile hall in the past year, and 30% were on probation or parole at the start of their most recent episode of homelessness. In my experience, working closely with this population, I see a lot of things driving these high numbers. Many of the same things that lead to homelessness lead to criminal system involvement, a history of trauma, parents or caregivers who were system involved, racism, involvement in the foster care system, poverty, mental health, and substance use disorders. These forces impact people across all aspects of their lives, leading to a cascade of difficulties. And there's also a kind of vicious cycle going on here, right? Unhoused people are more likely to become system involved as homelessness becomes increasingly criminalized. At the same time, system involved people are more likely to become homeless because of the destabilizing effect system involvement has on their families, communities, and lives. And then people with criminal records are much, much, much harder to house. When we talk about criminalizing homelessness, we're talking about a few different ways that unhoused people end up in the criminal legal system, based in large part because of their status of being unhoused. On the most basic level, it's the act of making it a crime to live without a house, to camp on the streets, to store belongings in a cart or a tent, to loiter, to panhandle, all the things unhoused people often do simply to exist. At the next level, it's our prosecuting people for the root causes of homelessness, issues related to mental health and substance use disorders, taking shelter or making a fire to stay warm. In Santa Cruz County, we do all of that. The question we have to grapple with as a community is whether it makes sense to punish unhoused people for what are arguably systemic failures. Failures of education, social systems, and public health. Byproducts of racism and classism. Functions of a society where the gap between rich and poor is ever widening in a county that is one of the most expensive places to live in the world. Is this fair? Is it good policy? Is it even legal? These are tough questions without easy answers. Let's start with whether it's even legal to criminalize homelessness. In the landmark case of Martin versus City of Boise, decided by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in 2018, the court considered a lawsuit brought by a half dozen homeless people cited for camping on public property in Boise, Idaho. Prior to this case, these citations were handed out like candy every day in communities across California, including ours. The federal appeals court said it's unconstitutional to punish people for sleeping on the sidewalk when there aren't enough shelter beds or housing available as an alternative. And in December of 2019, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear the case, leaving in place this ruling, which is binding on every jurisdiction in California, including Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz, like many other places, historically relied on anti-camping ordinances to police how and where unhoused people were living on the streets, roll them up and move them along at will, or even just throw them in jail. The law after Martin versus City of Boise is that places like our county, where we do not have anywhere near enough shelter beds or housing to offer unhoused people, we can't do it anymore. It's not legal. As is often the case with the law, before the ink even dried on Martin versus City of Boise, politicians, lawmakers, and activists were looking for ways to get around it. It should come as no secret to those of you who live in North Santa Cruz County that there are powerful, affluent, wealthy voters who don't want to see people living on the streets. They don't want to see encampments on the river. They don't want to see encampments in parks and public spaces. They feel their communities have been negatively impacted in ways that they find unacceptable. So in Santa Cruz, we still have anti-camping ordinances. They're just tailored to get around Martin versus City of Boise. Instead of aiming at camping in its broadest sense, they look at how, when, and where it's done, and under what circumstances. Santa Cruz Municipal Code Section 6.36.040 prohibits overnight encampments when there's an available overnight sanctioned sleeping location or a 24/7 shelter. It prohibits daytime encampment when there's an available 24/7 sanctioned shelter or available homeless person storage. What this looks like to our unhoused population is that as long as the city provides a place for homeless people to store their things during the day, regardless of whether it's practical, feasible, or possible, regardless of whether they may actually need those things, people can't camp during the day. And together, these rules criminalize the existence of an encampment that can't be swept away at sunrise, which means folks are unstable. They're moving every night, they're moving every day. California Senate Bill 31 would prohibit homeless encampments near schools, parks, libraries, and daycare centers, which in a lot of communities is effectively everywhere. And Santa Cruz, as you know, also restricts vehicle dwelling, the parking of mobile homes, loitering, and the distribution of food, like that done by Food Not Bombs, which now requires registration and permits. Together, these efforts make it difficult for homeless people to exist, and it gives law enforcement officers and prosecutors plenty of hooks for citing, charging, convicting, and incarcerating homeless people. Another program on the horizon is Care Court, which comes to Santa Cruz on December 1st, 2024. The idea here is to get people suffering from schizophrenia, spectrum, or psychotic disorders stabilized and linked to supportive services. The goal is to avoid conservatorships and criminal legal system involvement. My office is working with the County Administrative Office and local law enforcement and government leaders to plan for Care Court. We're advocating for a model that focuses on providing our clients with stabilization through housing first. As the public defender, I feel that my role in this is to make sure that Care Court doesn't become another on-ramp into criminal system involvement, and to make sure it doesn't impinge on the civil liberties of some of our most vulnerable community members. As public defenders, we're on the front lines of this crisis. I mentioned the mentally ill woman we represented who was charged with first-degree burglary because she showered in a house under construction after she was raped. That case isn't an outlier. Our homeless clients suffering from mental health disorders get arrested for outbursts, charged as criminal threats, another strike felony. And when people suffering from a mental health crisis are arrested, they often end up resisting officers, which adds a felony resisting an executive officer to their legal problems. If a homeless person breaks a window to get into an unoccupied building like a shed to warm up or have a safe night of sleep, that's felony vandalism. They try to sleep on private property, that's trespassing. If they build a fire to warm up, that can be interpreted and charged as arson. These cases can get very complicated and very serious very quickly. Less serious but equally troubling are the sweeps carried out on our clients who are living in their cars or motorhomes because they have nowhere else to go. When officers see an expired registration tag or illegal parking, they issue citation and tow the homes away. Our clients end up on the street where they get additional citations for camping, open containers, and unleashed dogs. And before you know it, they have hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in unpaid fines, bench warrants, and criminal convictions. As a new public defender appointed on a platform of reducing incarceration, reducing recidivism, and offering real solutions to the root causes of system involvement, I've thought a lot about what it means to be a client-centered public defender under these circumstances. I've thought a lot about how our agency can be a part of the solution rather than further entrench the problem, and how we can truly act as public servants, serving the public in a way that respects our clients' autonomy, in a way that respects the community that we serve in, and in a way that really tries to look holistically at this issue to try to solve it. I want to stop to answer questions before I talk about what our agency is doing to look at this problem, and before I also bring Caitlin's voice in. That was a lot of law, a lot of ideas. I'd love your thoughts on it.
I have a question.
Yeah, of course.
So you mentioned a bit about North County and the woeful lack of, bedded housing here. But I would also point out that up here in the valley, homelessness often looks very different than it does this. It's often invisible, right? If you're not everyone sees the folks down on Highway 9, but up farther in the valley, they're under blue tent, they're off the highway, people don't see them, they don't get help or care. And I was wondering how you would approach that. What changes in your strategy?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Glenn, and it's such a good point. I'm about to go into a little bit about how we operate at Public Defender that might help answer that question. Wearing my other hat as the policy board member, that's something I'm going to think about as we look at strategies and frankly, look at the different applications for funding for some of the solutions that are being brought, and think about how we can also serve that community. It's definitely out of sight, out of mind, right? And I think you're so right. That's a really, really great point, and I'm glad you brought it up. Jack?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. You mentioned Care Court, and you just mentioned funding now. And do you know where the funding is going to come, as I understand it, for when the judges assign folks to certain kinds of services through Care Court, where the funding is going to come for those services?
Yeah, there's been some money, thrown at the problem in the Care Court legislation. It's mostly going to behavioral health. There's not a lot for public defense. We often end up with these kind of unfunded mandates. And we're going to be working to understand how we can use our small but mighty team to provide, excellent representation to these folks who are really our most vulnerable people. It's such a good question, Jack, and I wish I had the answer. I fear that the state is going to underfund it based on history and having been born in the day but not yesterday. But we'll see how that all pans out. Thank you for the question, and I'm sure that in this year ramping up for Care Court, I'll be giving a lot of presentations on it as we flesh it out and try to understand how it's going to impact our communities. It's a big, big new thing that we're going to have to wrap our brains around.
Great. Thanks.
Heather, there's an additional follow-up question in the chat. How do we stay informed about Care Court from Amanda?
Yeah, that's a great question, Amanda. So, the CAO, the County Administrative Office, is taking the lead on trying to understand how care court is going to impact our community. I'm a part of a group of county leaders who meet frequently to look at this. We're working on, our communication strategy and our messaging because people have so many questions. I mean, to be quite frank, right now, we have so many questions too that I'm not sure our answers are anything but guesses. There are 7 jurisdictions that are rolling out care court. I'm in close contact with the defenders in each of those jurisdictions to see what it looks like for our teams and our agency. The CAO is in close contact with those county leaders. Behavioral health is in close contact with those behavioral health systems. And so together, we're kind of trying to understand what this will look like for Santa Cruz. I would say the press is a great place. I mean, Lookout has already run a very informative piece on care court. The Sentinel has reached out. The county website, you can always reach out to me for an update. I'm happy to keep you in the loop. I'll provide my information at the end. But I think there's going to be a lot of buzz around it, and it should be pretty easy to find information. I hope, if we do our jobs right. Awesome. Well, shall I go ahead and turn to a little more about my office? Okay. So as I dreamed this office and I thought about the many equity, public health, and legal issues that face our clients, and to give you some background, I was a defender here for 8 years before I was appointed to this position. So I, really felt like I had a sense of what our clients needed. And the story that kept coming to mind for me, which maybe some of you has heard, is a story told by the late anti-apartheid and human rights activist, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. So he tells this story about a group of picnickers, and they're on this riverbank. They see a man drowning, and they rush in to save him. And just as they're dragging the man onto the beach, they see 2 more people drowning in the river. So they rush in to save them. And then there are 4 people, 8 people, 16 people. The rescuers scream for help. Others join the rescue party, and together they form a human chain across this raging river to save these people who are drowning in alarming numbers. Suddenly, one of the rescuers breaks away from the group, and she walks away. The others yell at her, "Where are you going? You have to help save these people. Get back in the river." And she yells back, "This isn't working. We have to go upstream to see why these people are falling in." As a public defender working on the front lines of a public health crisis that's driving people into the criminal legal system, I have spent most of my career in this raging river, trying to save people as they slipped right on by. The human chain hasn't worked for us. It hasn't worked for my clients. Many of the people that I've represented and that we continue to represent are suffering from mental health and substance use disorders, hopelessness, generational trauma, and of course, homelessness. We cannot litigate our way out of these problems. We have to get better at going upstream and figuring out what's pushing people in. At our new Office of the Public Defender, we've adopted model public defense practices designed to offer real solutions to the root cause of system involvement. We are trying to break cycles of recidivism and incarceration rather than continually fight this current and watch our clients slip by and drown. We believe that by being proactive rather than reactive, we can help our clients lift themselves up and out of the system. And I can tell you it's client-centered because I have represented thousands of people, and I have never had not one look me in the eye and say, "Miss Rogers, when I was a little girl or a little boy, I dreamed of growing up in a cage." Our families and our clients want to get better, and they want to go home. Addressing homelessness is key to our strategy because without shelter, it is impossible for people to stabilize. I love this quote from Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and it really guides our work here. There comes a point where we need to stop just pulling people out of that river. We've got to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. As many of you know, our office opened its doors on July 1st, 2022 as the first county public defense agency in Santa Cruz County. But for 47 years, the law firm of Biggam, Christensen Minsloff provided public defense services. They built a legacy of fierce, talented, and committed public defenders. Many of those defenders joined us in forming the backbone of this office, and others are still an integral part of our defense community. Here at this office, we're building on the legacy with a mission, vision, and values that reflects the changing needs of our clients and community. The public defender, I like to point out, is the only lawyer required by the Constitution. So a good strategy, my humble opinion, would be to fund us first. And if there's any money left, maybe we can give some to the DA and county council. But we are the only ones that the founding fathers wrote right in. We are constitutionally and statutorily mandated to defend people accused of crimes or facing involuntary commitment in Santa Cruz County. We do that by defending between 6,500 to 10,000 cases a year, depending on how many cases our prosecutors choose to file. But as client-centered defenders, we do a lot more than defend the four corners of a case. You can see that in our mission, vision, and values. It doesn't just say, show up to court, plead somebody guilty or not guilty, try the case. There's so much more to this. Our mission is to courageously defend the accused, to demand equal justice for all, and to empower our clients with inspired advocacy in the courtroom and community. We're on a mission to elevate public defense, one client at a time, to break down the myth of the public pretender, and to have rich people begging for our services. Our vision is to lead the charge in transforming public defense, to empower those we serve by honoring their experiences, amplifying their voices, and offering real solutions to the root causes of system involvement. We share our values with all of you. We're courageous, compassionate, client-focused, creative, collaborative, and culturally responsive. And our commitment to DEI goes hand in hand with this. It's a commitment that we don't just talk about it, we honor it with action. We have a director of training, equity, and development who supports us in embedding equity in all we do. We have meaningful services, outreach, and a presence throughout the county, which means we have a bustling office in Watsonville full of defenders just waiting to serve our clients there. And our policies and procedures are designed to enhance DEI, not just in our organization, but also in our services and in our community. To fulfill this mission, realize our vision, and embody our values, we've created a defense model that responds to the unique needs of this county, including homelessness and the root causes that drive it. When Larry and Jerry and John conceived of public defense 47 years ago, this county had a problem with serial killings. We were the serial killer capital of the world. In the 47 years since then, the population has changed and the needs of our clients have changed. Our community-based whole person defense model acknowledges what we know to be true. Vigorous courtroom advocacy is rarely enough to truly defend our clients. We have to figure out what's pushing people into the river if we want cycles of structural racism, poverty, and incarceration to stop. We need more than one arrow in our quiver. We have to be zealous advocates in and out of the courtroom, of course, skilled trial lawyers, fierce negotiators, powerful advocates, but we also need holistic practices, interdisciplinary teams ready to address the enmeshed legal and social needs that drive clients into the system. And we can't do it alone. We need all of you. We have to engage our community, from community-based organizations that offer support and treatment, to family members, supporters, clergy, friends, and people who care about good policy and good law, people like you. We have to work together to go upstream. I'm going to pass the baton to Caitlin to tell you a little bit more about holistic defense and community-based whole person defense. I'm so grateful to have Caitlin. Bronx Defenders, which is where she spent the last decade, really brought this model to life and did tremendous work educating the nation why it wasn't enough to just go to court for clients anymore. Why, if we really wanted to end mass incarceration and not just represent the exact same clients for the rest of our careers, we had to do something different. And so I'm going to let Ms. Becker, who's really the expert, tell you a little bit more about this.
Oh, thank you so much, Heather. And it is so great to be with all of you today. So I'm new to Santa Cruz, as much depth of experience as Heather has here in this community. I come from a really different place. the Bronx, New York, which is a community that looks really different from Santa Cruz County. And these pillars of holistic defense that were developed at the Bronx Defenders were intended to be a sort of springboard for what holistic defense might look like in each jurisdiction that is building a model responsive to the community that they serve. And so that's what we're doing here. We're not importing this model of holistic defense that works specifically in the Bronx, but really looking to these principles to inform our approach to how we're going to respond to the incredible needs that we've been talking about today here in Santa Cruz. So the pillars of holistic defense that we're kind of building from: seamless access to services that meet the people that we represent, their legal and social support needs. And so not just, as Heather mentioned, a lawyer standing next to a person in a courtroom zealously advocating for them. That's happening, of course, but access to all of the services that people might need to address both the things that are driving them or pushing them into the system, pushing them into the river, as in the analogy that Heather offered, and also all the consequences that flow from becoming involved in the criminal legal system. And so we're working to build out seamless access to services, both within our organization, within the public defender, and also in the community. Dynamic interdisciplinary communication. So we are not social workers and advocates working separately or siloed from our lawyer colleagues, but that we are working together and communicating together. And so that my client calls me and says, you know, I know that I'm represented by a team. This is my team, my social worker, my advocate, my lawyer, my investigator, my administrative team member. There are all of these people working together to represent the person that we have the privilege to serve. And that requires dynamic communication. Advocates with an interdisciplinary skill set. Heather mentioned our director of training, equity, and inclusion and development. And so we're really kind of looking to embed our training with the skills that people need to do this work well. So it's really important to develop really strong trial advocacy skills. That is super important for a public defender to have. And the people that we represent also need defenders who know how to respond to moments of crisis, how to work with people who are experiencing symptoms of mental illness, who are dealing with all of the big issues that we've been talking about today. That is not something that our lawyers are taught in law school. And so how can we build out our teams to make sure they have the skills and support that they need to do the work well? And then lastly, a robust understanding of and connection to the community served. We are saying yes to every invitation to be present in the community, to table at community events, to do outreach, so that the people in this community know that we are here and we are responsive and available, and that our model is going to continue to evolve responsive to what we hear from the community and what they need. So those are the pillars that we're kind of building from. And thanks to the Bronx for developing it. And also, we're really excited to see what it's going to look like here and how we can continue to develop it here. Something that's consistent across holistic defender offices, no matter what jurisdiction, is that we're building out this team to represent the person that we serve. And so our client is at the center of our representation. And we can't do all of this alone. As community defenders, we've got some resources in-house. We've got social workers and advocates. And then we also have community-based organizations and family members and treatment providers. And we're looking at all of the things that are going on for our clients, centering their experience and building a team around them. Our holistic defense division is myself. I have 2 social workers on our team, and they are both from Santa Cruz. And they have a real deep understanding of this community, knowledge of the resources here. And we have 6 advocates through Partners for Justice, which is a nonprofit I'll talk about in a moment, tell you a little bit more about Partners for Justice in a future slide. But we've got 6 advocates that are part of the team. And we build these defense teams, as I mentioned before, around our clients. So each of our defense teams is staffed with a defense attorney, a holistic advocate who's on the team, meaning not just representing the client, but also in the courtroom. So if a client's case, for example, is in one particular courtroom, there's attorneys that are assigned to that courtroom. There's a holistic defense advocate that's assigned to that courtroom, an investigator, and a legal assistant that are all working with clients throughout the entire pendency of their case. So they're meeting them on the first day or even before through our early representation project, and then continuing to represent that person all the way through the conclusion of their case. So that there is that consistency and that there's that team built around the client responsive to their needs. And we can do this because we have the great benefit of working with Partners for Justice, which is a national nonprofit that embeds client advocates who are social justice minded individuals who are interested in public defense, interested in law and social work in public defender offices who wouldn't maybe otherwise have the opportunity to build out a holistic defense model in the way that we've been able to do it here. And so we have 6 advocates through Partners for Justice. They provide technical assistance and support and training and help us to build the story and tell the story of the work that the advocates are doing. And so we're really grateful for that partnership to be able to do that work. Our next slide shows you just kind of one of the ways that we identify what's going on for our clients. And this is a sample of our holistic intake. And every person that we represent, whether it's we're meeting them in the courtroom on the first day that their case is arraigned, or we have the opportunity to meet with them early through our early representation project, we're asking everybody all of these questions. So what's happening for you? What's going on with your housing? Is there any housing instability? Are you in need of connection to resources or support related to housing, employment, mental health issues, substance use issues? These questions that we know because of our experience of doing this work for such a long time are central to our clients' experience of being prosecuted in the criminal legal system, the consequences that flow from their involvement in this system, all are connected to these underlying issues and sometimes these big systemic issues that are causing our clients to come before the court. And so we're asking everybody these questions, and then we are just very simply connecting them with resources if they're interested in connecting with resources to help support them. The resources in Santa Cruz exist for sure, but are sometimes really hard to navigate. So if our advocates, if our client says that they really need a connection to housing navigation resources, but it's hard for them to make that connection, then we'll make that direct connection with them and help make sure that they have the advocacy and support that they need to continue those relationships that might lead to permanent housing or connections to permanent housing. The next slide shows you just a little example of what we've been able to figure out in the small amount of time that we've had advocates at the Public Defender's Office just these past 10 months. This is just a slide that shows that we've worked with 401 people in the course of our time. That's the sort of more intensive case management that our advocates have done. They've touched many more cases than that. But of those clients, 126 identified housing as a key goal of something that they're working on, that they need help with, they need support around. So 30%, more than 30% of the people that we represent identified housing as a major goal that they wanted to work on with us. The next slide shows just what we've been able to do. The vast majority of people are interested in and need support around long-term housing. I think we've been talking about that all evening, and that's no surprise that the vast majority of people are looking for support around and actually being able to be connected to long-term housing. And so we're also, of course, working on emergency housing and other things like that. But the vast majority of people are looking for permanent long-term housing. And then lastly, we've got this slide that shows of the advocates who have completed at least one of the goals that they set out to work on with their advocates when they began the work with them. 49 of those 144 were able to connect with some sort of concrete housing resource or were able to meet a housing goal that they had. And so we're really glad to know that both we are, understanding what our clients are going through, but also able to connect them with the support and advocacy that they need to hopefully obtain more stability in their housing. And then my last slide is just to tell you a couple of quick stories. And so the one I'll just give you a flavor of what this looks like in practice. So we had a young mom who was arrested after an incident that happened with her partner on a domestic violence case. She's a primary caregiver of 2 young daughters, resides in a family shelter placement. She was rearrested when there were new allegations made against her by her former partner. And when we learned of that arrest, she was in jail. It was a Friday afternoon. Our social worker, the social worker on the case, went over to jail, met with our client, and found out that she was facing a loss of her shelter placement, her family shelter placement, where her and her 2 young daughters lived. Her daughters had been taken at the time of the arrest, and we needed to make sure that they were with her sister and that her sister had the support that she needed to care for the children over the weekend. We knew that she wasn't going to be able to see a judge and she wasn't going to be able to get out before the weekend. And then we were able to call that shelter placement and say, you know, we're with her. We know what's going on. With her permission, we're able to advocate to keep that shelter placement so that when we did appear before the court on Monday morning, we were able to explain everything that was going on to the court, make sure that the court knew that she had that stable shelter placement. She could go back and her kids could go back. There was a child protective investigation that opened as a result of this arrest, and we were able to help her navigate all of that and reunite with her daughters in the shelter on Monday, maintain that shelter placement, and she continues to work now towards long-term support, long-term housing for her family. And I'll just give you one other quick story. We had another client who identified housing as a concern and worked with an advocate to get a studio apartment through Community Supports Alliance. We are regularly referring to community-based organizations who can help our clients with housing navigation. And so once he was able to find that housing, he was able to line up job interviews. And came by the office a couple of weeks after his case closed just to thank the advocate for helping him. And this was a challenging relationship for this advocate. Our client had a really tough time developing trust. We are system players and system actors, and our clients see us as that, and for good reason. We understand why. And so one of the things that client said to our advocate was he was really grateful that she hadn't given up on him when he was being defensive and stubborn, as we all are when we are faced with so much intractable issues that especially this client was facing. And it really meant a lot to him that we just kept showing up and kept advocating for him to get the support that he needed. So just a few little examples of what the work looks like in practice, and I'll pass back to Heather.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. I just have a few more things to tell you about what we're doing, and then some thoughts on how I think we can all work together on next steps. But before I do that, I want to open up the floor for any questions of Caitlin Becker, who really is probably the expert in holistic defense social work in the country. And we're so lucky to have her here in Santa Cruz County. If you have any questions for her, now's a good time. Also at the end, and also you're always welcome to reach out to us. We're here for you. All right, I don't see any hands, so I'll go ahead and keep moving forward. So another way we support our unhoused clients is by providing record clearance advocacy through our Clean Slate project. So we help people who've had criminal legal system involvement clear up their records, and that can pave the way to housing, employment, loans, and education. This is a free service we provide to anyone with a criminal conviction arising out of Santa Cruz County, and we get about 30 to 40 new clients a month in this program. It's an extremely popular program. We file on average 40 motions a month, and since we started, we filed over 400 record clearance motions alone. That includes requests for dismissals and expungements, petitions to seal arrest records, petitions to terminate sex offender registration, and governor's pardons. Our win rate is over 99%. And that's in part because our DA's office and our bench believes in second chances. An estimated 8 million people in California have an arrest or criminal conviction. That's 1 in 3 adults. Wow, it's crazy staggering. So granting record clearance relief to people who served their time, paid their debt, and are working to make their lives better is fair, good policy, and a sensible way to clear roadblocks to housing. So in Clean Slate, we've worked with several clients who were or are homeless. I mean, many, really, hundreds. But one of the things we saw, an anecdote I'd like to share, is a client who'd been charged with infractions for camping. And this led to severe financial penalties, right? over $300 in civil assessments. That went to collections, where it gets exponentially bigger. We had another client get over 20 infractions while she was homeless and suffering with substance use. And when she finally achieved sobriety, she came to the record clearance program to dismiss her criminal contacts and address failures to appear in bench warrants. But you can't do any of that with all those fines and fees unpaid. So the first thing we had to do is find fee abatement, right? To get her working on community service hours in lieu of those fines, and to create a path for her to clear her record, which can be really, really hard for folks who are crushed under this kind of debt. But this is the kind of work that we do. It addresses root causes, it breaks vicious cycles, and our team here is really, really committed to meeting our clients where they're at and making sure that we do everything we can as public defenders to end mass incarceration, to address big problems like homelessness, and most of all, to help our clients lift themselves up and out of the system. We're also working to create a reentry framework that can support incarcerated clients coming out of custody. They need our support because sometimes we get clients who are just released from jail without shoes, let alone a plan, right? And their chances of not ending up back in custody are just infinitesimally small. So no matter what good work we do through early representation, through public defense, through smart prosecution, if at the end of the day we shove somebody out the door with nothing, they're going to fail. That's just common sense. So right now, we do not have the staffing with 2 social workers to do all of this ourselves. We're in conversations with CBOs, county partners, and funders to do this together. And in the meantime, of course, we provide support to anybody who reaches out for us needing reentry, and work with our clients on probation and parole who are in crisis by offering them the support of Caitlin's small but mighty team. We're also working with county and community partners to strategize a coordinated approach to serving our unhoused community members. One agency to keep your eye on, if you're not already aware of it, is Housing for Health, led by the amazing Robert Ratner. The goals of this small but mighty division are in line with best practices and worthy of voter support and worthy of resources. The idea here is to build a coalition to prevent homelessness, to increase connections, and to expand permanent housing. These are all things we have to do to wrap our arms around this problem. As Ray mentioned, I am on the Housing for Health Partnership Policy Board. I'm working with a group of 14 other leaders to do high-level planning and decision-making around this. But really, what I want to impart on you is we have so many bright, talented people working on this issue, and we would love your support, and we need your support. Some of the things I'd love to keep talking about with you and with others in our community are decriminalizing homelessness. It's not working. It's bad policy. It basically just doubles down on the problem, and people just spiral deeper and deeper into a place of instability, and it's harder and harder to help them get out of it. We need to change the narrative to stop otherizing our unhoused community, right? We need to accept our responsibility as a society that created structures, law, and policy that exacerbate the problems that drive people into homelessness. We as a society did this, and we as a society need to fix it. I truly believe that. Investing in housing, supportive housing, and treatment, rather than citations, convictions, and incarceration, makes good sense. It's cheaper, and it's ethical and humane. Addressing upstream root causes of homelessness to avoid downstream consequences has to be our goal at every level of government and community, and funding and supporting robust community-based reentry that links our incarcerated people to benefits, housing, treatment, and employment before they're released is going to do so much to help shore up our resources and solve these problems. I also want to plant the seed of a homeless court. In cases where criminal system involvement feels inevitable, there's this great new model that's being pioneered in counties like San Diego County. It's being supported with technical assistance and help by the American Bar Association. And the idea here is that homeless courts combine progressive plea bargaining with alternative sentencing and assurances of no custody in exchange for engaging in activities that are going to help you lift yourselves up and out to address a full range of misdemeanors: jaywalking, under the influence, theft, driving under the influence. Participants who appear in homeless court with these cases submit proof of completion of program activities, and if they do the program, they can do that without threat of custody or enhanced fines. Instead, the community wraps around them, lifts up their efforts, and tries to help them help themselves, which I think is so cool and something we could definitely do here with some will and some action. Finally, it's really important to me as the public defender, and it's important to our team to maintain connections with our community. That means being present in spaces our clients inhabit. It also means being present in the spaces that you inhabit. We're grateful for these invitations. We want to get to know all of you better. And it's our goal to be leaders in building a strong local, regional, and national public defense community that can work together with community to tackle the big issues like homelessness. I'll end with the words of Martin Luther King Jr., written from inside the Birmingham jail in 1963. These words continue to drive our work as public defenders. They remind us that we still have a lot to do to achieve equity, dismantle racist structures, and provide equal justice for all, including to our brothers, sisters, friends, and neighbors who are unhoused. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. We are tied in a single garment of destiny. And at the Office of the Public Defender, we are committed to fighting for justice, including housing justice. And again, we're just honored and grateful to be here. We're happy to, share tackling this problem with you. And if you have additional questions, we're here to answer them either tonight or anytime. You're welcome to reach out. This is Caitlin and I's information, and we encourage you to use it. Thank you so very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I do have so many questions. I will also we'll let everybody else raise their hands as that happens, as they also have questions. Ideally, folks, if you can use the reaction button to raise your hand. If that doesn't work, try waving at us, and we'll see what works. One of my first questions is, you mentioned that sometimes people are leaving jail, they basically have nothing. I have heard of this in the past. Are there any organizations or programs for donating clothes to people who would be in that scenario that we could potentially participate in?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So a couple of things. So a dream of mine is to help the Santa Cruz County Defense Bar Association become a registered nonprofit so that they could manage basically a bridge fund for Indigenous clients across the system who are facing needs. And the bar right now is that just getting a nonprofit lawyer to help us do that costs more money than we have in our fund. It's over $3,000. But eventually we hope to be able to incorporate Santa Cruz County Defense Bar as a nonprofit and house the bridge fund there. Because my office represents 85 to 90% of indigent clients, but there are also 2 layers of conflict. And I want to make sure that the emergency fund can fund all of these people, not just the people who get the public defender. So more on that as we get that going and we're able to hold fundraisers and really get that money to the people who need it. In the meantime, Friends Outside does really good work of supporting people who are incarcerated and supporting people who are coming out of incarceration. A lot of other places don't really come to mind. I mean, CAB does work with this population, and we're working with them to apply for a grant where we can do a little bit better around this. But the truth is right now it's a huge unmet need. I'm trying to think of who else. Caitlin, do you have any ideas for me? Or maybe other people here have ideas.
Yes, I would definitely open it up to the group. If you all have other ideas, drop them in the chat. The other organization that comes to mind is Monarch Services. It does a lot of work with women who are in custody and leaving custody to help with concrete needs and housing and things like that. So Monarch is another organization that probably accepts donations, but I will just take a second to say that I helped start the Client Emergency Fund in the Bronx 10 years ago, and it's 10 years old now. And it's just unbelievable what, like, everybody is so, I think grateful to be able to say, I'm donating $100 and I know that that's going to go to house, clothing or material needs. It's just small things that make such a huge difference for our clients. A night in a motel room when there's absolutely no other housing option to offer, I think it does make a great deal of difference. So I'm excited to imagine that starting here.
I'm excited too. And so one thing that makes us different than the Bronx is, of course, a nonprofit. And so as a county agency that serves indigent people, we don't accept, of course, any money from anyone. And donations have to be cleared through the Board of Supervisors and declared, and taxes get paid. And it's really complicated. And so the best solution for me was what I talked about, hopefully housing a bridge fund with Santa Cruz County Defense Bar. But we're also open to other ideas you all might have around that. The goal is just to have a fund that we can easily draw upon without a lot of fanfare, because our clients literally walk in without shoes, right? And so we can't call 1,000 people or do 25 forms in triplicate. We just need to be able to hand them a pair of shoes and a housing voucher, or, you know, a gift certificate to Goodwill or whatever it may be, without having it get cleared by an auditor and all those different things. And so we probably could never really house that here at Defenders for all those reasons.
Cool. Great. Okay. I think Glenn had their hand up next.
Yeah. So first of all, I love your upstream metaphor, but I think of it in a slightly different way, and I wanted to just give that to you. I'm going to quote a different archbishop, a Brazilian archbishop by the name of Dom Helder Camara, who said, when I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why they're poor, they call me a communist. And so it's about treating symptoms versus treating causes, right? And so we need to go back to that first slide of yours where you talk about why people become homeless, because they were evicted, because they lost their jobs. Treat those causes and the symptom of homelessness goes away, right? I mean, you know, so, you know, I really think that that's where we should really point our focus at, and say, well, if you don't like this, homeless people, People's Street, whatever, you know, then you should be working on these things. And the other thing I wanted to do was just to share a picture with you, if I might. This was Sunday morning when I parked for Pride. It is right across from the Galleria, where downtown, where the DCC headquarters, Democratic Central Committee headquarters are. And this picture raises so much anger in me and so much questions. How does him writing her ticket help? How it just makes the problem worse, right? Is this really the best use of that person's time, you know, writing a ticket, right, for homeless? You know, who is being served here, right? You know, I didn't engage because, you know, guy has a gun, but, you know, I was just, it really made me angry and frustrated that this is the kind of thing we see all the time, and it doesn't help, and it makes things worse, and it just builds the cycle over and over and over again. So I'll stop ranting.
Oh, no, those were really, really great points, Glenn. And I wrote down your quote. I love quotes, you may have noticed, and I love stories. And that's a really important one. Thank you.
Okay. You need to unmute.
Valley Churches United in Ben Lomond literally has a stockpile of bagged clothing that they do for age and sizes already. So that is somebody you could hit up today, right now, who has already got that together to share. It's not
wonderful.
Work for long, you know, I don't know time frame or any of that, but they're doing that already and are a viable option.
Yeah, I love it. I know Caitlin is taking notes. We have a database of resources that her team draws on, and that's a great one. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, I have further questions in that case. So you mentioned there's a tendency towards criminalization of homelessness. Are there any new laws that are sort of coming into the works that you're most concerned about, or?
Yeah, I mean, AB 31, you're just making it harder and harder to camp is really, really tough for people, because at some point, you know, we're not giving people any shelters. We're not giving them anywhere to go. I think that sort of the point that I tried to make through some of these anecdotes is that the criminalization of homelessness is partly about, anti-camping ordinances, jaywalking, all the things, but it's also about using traditional, very, very serious, violent and serious felonies to criminalize behaviors that are the sort of obvious symptom of these deeper causes, right? And so for me, I think the bigger issue that we need to look at is how we can address mental illness and substance use, compassionately, with smart policies that actually get to the root problem rather than incarcerate the problem and then release it later more mentally ill, right? And more addicted is how our clients end up when they're released from jail. No one gets better in jail. Fun fact. I hope I'm not blowing anybody's mind. People get better with treatment because they're sick, right? So I think we need to stop using the laws we have to criminalize the root causes. And I think we need to, rather than, continuing to move people along with all of these ticky-tacky infractions and misdemeanors, we need to think about how to house them, because it turns out it's cheaper and it's definitely a lot better for my clients.
Okay, I'm going to do a sort of a shotgun approach here and ask you 3 questions at once. What should we be asking of the DA in this idea of we're prosecuting people that for basically having health problems and being homeless? Is there something that we should be asking of the DA in terms of how and who they're choosing to prosecute? Do you feel like the local courts are supportive of alternatives to incarceration? And on that note, do you have any thoughts on the neighborhood court system?
Sure. So starting with the DA, the DA is elected, right? Which means how y'all feel matters about how our DA does his job. And I know it doesn't come as any surprise to you that homelessness is a really divisive issue, and that there are a lot of very loud, powerful voices who just want the problem to disappear. And so what that translates into is the only arrow in the DA's quiver, which is tough on crime, right? And so in some ways, that's not necessarily the place to look, except to say, let's just not go after these serious felonies for people who are mentally ill. If a mentally ill person wanders into a house and takes a shower, there are ways that we can address that situation, but saddling that person with a strike and sending him to prison is probably not the best look. Also, of course, these ticky-tacky ordinances we keep putting on the books to just move people around and do what we saw on the photo that was shared by Glenn, they're not helping anything, right? They're maybe getting people reelected because voters feel like, this politician is solving the problem, but in reality, they're exacerbating it and they're doubling down on the crisis, and we're just making it worse. And so we need to get away from that with all of our elected officials, including the DA. Are the courts open to alternatives? The courts are open to alternatives, but the judges are also elected, which means the judges are scared and the judges are responsive to the voters. The judges are afraid that if they let somebody who's mentally ill out of custody, that person might hurt somebody, right? They're afraid if they let somebody who's in the throes of a substance use disorder out of custody, they might hurt somebody. The safe option for the DA and for the court is to incarcerate, because nothing can go, I'm not going to say nothing can go wrong there. Things go wrong there. It's less likely that something's going to make front page news if that person is kept in jail rather than released. And so we need to be courageous as a community. We need to actually look at the statistics of what's working, and we need to adopt smart policies in line with those statistics, recognizing that in the individual case, yes, something is probably going to go wrong, but what's going wrong for the whole country, for our state, and for this community is mass incarceration and so many levels of injustice that it's hard to wrap your arms around. So yes, someone's going to make front page news who's released after a bout of mental illness or substance use. We have to accept that could happen, but we also have to accept that the alternative is unacceptable. And their last question regarding neighborhood courts, I think restorative justice is a great model. We're working closely with the DA's office to promote neighborhood courts for folks who it makes sense for. We have a pilot project with the DA's office and Watsonville Police Department to hand out information about our early representation program along with neighborhood courts information, with the idea that we can off-ramp people out of the system before they even get into it. But these are really programs for people who are not system involved for the most part, right? I mean, now and then you can get somebody in who's system involved, but this is sort of a different population. Those programs are great and they're really, really important. But as you can see from the statistics, most of our unhoused population, they've been in jail or prison or juvenile hall, over 30% of them in the last year, which means we are talking about people who are already heavily system involved. And restorative justice is not a great model if you're suffering from mental illness, substance use, homelessness, and instability, because restorative justice, you sit in a circle and you talk about the harms and you try to repair them and you engage with community members. And it's wonderful for the population. It's wonderful for. That is not the population we're talking about tonight. Homeless courts. That's the way to go, right? It's a different model. The way it works in San Diego County is providers who are vetted by the county to provide these services. Applicants go to those people and say, I got a citation or I got a criminal offense. I want to go to homeless court. And then it's the community that sets out a treatment plan. And by the time they get to court, they've accomplished that plan and they're guaranteed no custody, no fines, no time, as long as they set out and do the plan that a CBO set out for them. So I think it's a great way to partner with the community to find solutions. And again, the idea is to keep people out of the system. Once folks are at public defender, they are system involved. We are the system, right? And so what I love about homeless court is it puts the power and agency back into our community. It's kind of like restorative justice in that someone sits down with a counselor or a social worker or an advocate, and they work out a plan to sort of ameliorate the harm. And they bring that to the court and say, we did this thing. And the pact is you're not going to jail. You're not going to be saddled with fines you can't pay. And instead, we're going to look at the initiative you took and help lift you up and out of the system.
Great. Okay. So who should we be writing to tell people that we want homeless courts in our system?
It's a great question. So our courts are run by the state, of course, and our DA's office and our public defender and our county council is run by the county and by the board of supervisors. But the judges are elected. And so I think reaching out to the presiding judge, the presiding judge over our criminal courts right now is Judge Saida Cogliati. I think she has an open mind. She's interested in solutions. She's a good person to reach out to on these issues. And then on the county side, of course, it's the board of supervisors who needs to fund the public defender to do this kind of work.
Perfect. Okay. Last question, I promise. You mentioned that the whole community needs to be involved, including families, employers, obviously health services. For those of us who are not in those professions, such as, the health services, but maybe are more in the ilk of being a family member or an employer or someone close to that kind of person, is there training available to help people get involved in those ways, or how can we do better in that regard as a community?
Oh, such a great question. One of the things that we're working on the policy board is, housing navigators, like training and working with housing navigators to wrap around folks and try to, get at some of these intractable problems, particularly people who are directly impacted with system involvement or have experienced homelessness. So, connecting the Housing for Health partnership with those folks would be great. In terms of other things, I just think about, all of the work our CBOs do to support this population that requires just armies of volunteers. I think of, Second Harvest, for example, as really, filling so many of the gaps with our community who are struggling with food insecurity. Of course, I would love, if you like what we're doing at Public Defender, to reach out to your supervisor and say, I support holistic defense. I support wraparound services. Let's get some permanent client advocates on that team. Let's hire some more social workers. They're worth their weight in gold. And I really do see public defense right now in this community as a public health crisis. And so we can't really solve it with huge teams of lawyers. We need interdisciplinary people working on it together.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I know I've kept you very long. I feel like I hogged the microphone.
No problem at all. I think we have a couple of hands up. We're happy to answer questions. That's why we're here.
Okay, last two, Laura and then Coco.
Hi, a quick question. I was just a little confused. Your advocacy for the homeless court sounds really interesting. I was very familiar with the restorative justice approach, but I think you make a really good point about that. But you were also talking about decriminalizing homelessness. And so if we decriminalize it, would there be a need for homeless court anymore? And so not that those steps to help remove the problem.
Exactly. So first option is always keep people out of the system. Once you're in the system, your chances of getting out of it are infinitesimally small, right? It's just a really sticky system. And once you're in it, you're like a fly in a trap. Totally agree. But for those cases where we're just not willing to decriminalize it entirely. So let's say, for example, the woman I talked about who ended up in a house. I've had clients, for example, who've started fires in houses like that or done other things where the community is not willing to say, we're just going to let this one go, right? I would love it if we just let more of it go with supportive services, because like I said, I think public defense is a public health issue, not an issue of criminality for the most part. You have the margins where things get interesting. But to the extent that we as a community believe that some folks do need some system involvement and support, homeless court is far, far better than locking people away and doubling down on trauma and creating situations that just spiral deeper and deeper, affecting their children, their families, their communities, and the next generation in ways that none of us think make sense.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think my question is, I basically agree. I think my largest concern is we don't have any mental health facilities or big enough to actually deal with our issue in our county. And most of that gets dumped on the city of Santa Cruz, where we have homelessness in these and people with problems all through our county.
Yeah.
So how do we, I think that our county has huge deficits in mental health help and housing and drug rehabilitation help and housing, at which point, until some of that is worked out in our county, I don't agree with, but a part of me understands why some people want that lady who started the fire in that house put in jail. So there's that squishy, weird space there, because we don't have these facilities in our community that I personally feel we desperately need. All through the county.
God. It's so true, Coco, and that's exactly it, right? And so incarceration and system involvement has become a catch-all for a failed social safety net. We don't have the mental health facilities, we don't have the substance use treatment facilities, and we don't have housing. And so what we do instead is we use our jails and our criminal legal system as a way to say, look, we're doing something about this problem. And so I think long term, of course, like our values are reflected in our budgets. And if we start putting our budgets into services and supportive services and housing and beds, it's going to end up costing us less, not just in time and treasure, but also in broken communities, broken families, foster children, who we know now are super likely to end up homeless and system involved themselves. We just need to break these cycles. And it requires a huge amount of will to look at a budget that has historically been this way and say, we're going to do something wildly and drastically different. We're going to revolutionize this budget, and we're going to take all of this money that's going to law enforcement or to criminalization, and we are going to shift it into support and see what happens. And I can promise you what happens is going to be better than what we're doing now.
Great. Thank you.
Who in our community that has, I guess the Board of Supervisors, right, is what you're saying as far as budget. Who is a positive ear there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the board is interested in what all of you all have to say, right? I mean, you are the voters, and you are not just the voters, you're the voters that show up at a Democratic club, right? You are the ones that they need to court. And so I think if you show up at board meetings, if you show up at city council meetings, if you write letters, if you press, if you elect people who are looking at really innovative ways to solve these problems, we are going to do better, right? And also just having these conversations. I mean, how amazing to be invited by you to talk about this. It's great that we're even talking about it, that we're sharing ideas, that we're sharing information, that we're brainstorming solutions. It's a great first step.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I think there will be plenty to follow up on, and my piles of notes here in terms of things to do, action items, I will call them. So thank you so much to both of you for being here. I'm thrilled that we could make this happen. That was enormously informative and helpful, and I realize there are no easy solutions to any of this, but I think it does give a lot of good information in terms of how we should be thinking about this, and hopefully how we can take actions to do our parts to address this complicated long-term problem. So thank you so much. We're going to move on with club business. Everybody is welcome to stay, but I'm sure plenty of you have other things you want to do. I will say, if you want to become a member of our club or just get on our contact list, that information is on our website, which is svslvdemocrats.org. We also have an upcoming fundraiser. You can get tickets for that. That's also on the website now. And all of it goes towards helping us operate and bring this kind of information and activities back to our community. So
thank you so much. It was really a pleasure. We're so grateful to have all of you and to work with you. On behalf of Caitlin and myself, we hope that we get to have another conversation soon. In the meantime, you've been very gracious hosts, and we will let you do your club business. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Take good care.
We'll do it. Silent round of applause for all the muted people.